I'm Kelsey. You might recognize me if you joined us a couple weeks ago on World Narcolepsy Day. Welcome to our Instagram Live today. I'm just going to invite our guest of the hour, Ginger Z, and then I'll introduce myself and Ginger, and we'll get started. Throughout today, feel free to toss any questions in the chat. I'll be sort of keeping my eyes peeled for as they come in. And we love all the love and emojis and waves. Hello. So keep it coming. Here we are.
We're here.
Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are.
Yes, we'll call it mid. The middle of everything. Like for me, it's like evening.
Where are you right now?
I'm in New York.
Okay.
I was live, early this morning on top of a building in New York. So,
wow.
Yep.
And I just woke up.
Yeah.
Well, I was just welcoming our guests, and I'll quickly introduce myself and then introduce you, and then we can just dive right in. My name's Kelsey Biddle. I'm a board member on Wake Up Narcolepsy. I also have narcolepsy type 1, and I'm currently in medical school at Harvard Medical School in my 4th year, technically, although I'm taking a gap year for research. And I'm here today with our wonderful guest, Ginger Z, who some of you might recognize. She is the chief meteorologist on ABC News Good Morning America, and the chief climate correspondent at ABC. She's also written some New York Times bestselling books about her own sort of journey with mental health and narcolepsy and everything in between, and some children's books to sort of get the youth interested and more aware of science and STEM opportunities. So we're so happy to have you here today, Ginger, to sort of talk all things narcolepsy. So thank you for being here with us.
Yes, I'm so used to talking meteorology, climate, and I don't get to talk narcolepsy as often. So here I am, ready.
Maybe we can do a little bit of both, like a little sprinkling of, I'd love maybe to just get started. I'd love to hear what you were doing on top of a building in New York today.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's what's so unique and so coincidental is a lot of times I've seen several different doctors for narcolepsy over the years. In different cities because I've lived in so many places in different TV stations and different parts of meteorology. And each time about, 2 or 3 sessions in, they'll say, well, maybe you should get a different job. I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's not going to happen. No, so I definitely work really odd hours and often shift work. Like, there'll be early morning and then a break and then an afternoon time. And so I think it's really applicable because so many people do not have the norm, especially after COVID. Everybody has a different type of schedule. And with narcolepsy, from what I've been told by most of those doctors, schedule helps and following circadian rhythm helps, which is just not possible for me. So
what also helps is doing something you're really passionate and excited about, which it sounds like you have been doing.
Yes, that is something I'm so fortunate, and I've worked really hard at sustaining because it's not the easiest. There's a lot of sacrifice, and it's not. We were all joking this morning. It's not as glamorous as people think. I think they have this idea. Even this week, I was down in Louisiana in southern Plaquemine Parish, where they're having salt water for the last 4 months already in their water, and this saltwater intrusion. And it was like one of the guys that was helping us from the Army Corps. I said, "Can I use the restroom in the water treatment plant?" And he's like, "Ooh, I don't know if you're going to want to." I was like, "Oh no, sir! Like having a bathroom is better than anything I've had for the last year. Like most of the time, we are out there in the elements. It's like camping, but working really hard while you're camping."
Wow. And doing it like with a camera crew. So
yeah.
Well, I so look forward to sort of diving into some of that, but maybe let's go back to sort of the beginning. And I'd love to hear about the sort of like early days of your journey with narcolepsy, when you first noticed symptoms and when you eventually sort of figured it out, like, oh, I have narcolepsy.
Yeah, I think I didn't even know what narcolepsy was, so I wouldn't have had imposter syndrome necessarily, but that is something that I know a lot of people deal with today. I think more I was confused because I was an extremely driven and type A person. But the first inklings that something was wrong was I was always with my high school boyfriend. I dated the same guy for most of my high school career. And yeah, sweet guy. But I would, he noticed first and started saying, like, you're falling asleep in places that you shouldn't fall asleep. And I always took it as an embarrassing thing. And often I would say to myself, well, that's because I'm pushing so hard and this is the first time I'm letting off the gas. You know, even if I got a lot of rest, though, I couldn't really explain it away. And it was embarrassing. And so I didn't love talking about it. And to the point where, I mean, even we would be like making out and then I would fall asleep. Which is always, yeah.
Not a boring kisser, maybe.
Yeah, and years later, it was so funny because I ran into him years later and I said, oh my gosh, you're going to love this. I was diagnosed with narcolepsy. He's like, I could have told you that, but my confidence needed to hear that. Thank you. Like,
oh, that's so sweet.
Yes. And so I think that's when I probably should have started taking it a little more seriously, but I did push hard. I was always doing two sports and, you know, all the honors classes and all the AP and extra. So I explained it away often. And then I went to college to study meteorology at Valparaiso, which is about 2.5 hours from my home. And I made that drive a lot, as you do in college, like, you know, especially at the beginning. Plus my high school boyfriend and I were together still. So I would drive almost all the way home to see him at his college. And that's when I started getting in car accidents. And I couldn't always explain what happened. And, you know, I think at the beginning, I think police and other people often, they were very much thinking drugs or alcohol. And I was like, no, right? Like, I swear that's not what's happening. And then I didn't really have a good answer. And then I was teaching aerobics my freshman year of college. And I thought I passed out, but I actually fell asleep in the cool down as I was teaching. So everyone thinks I'm having a heart attack, right? And then it happened later that year. I was doing also like stretching after a run in my dorm room, and someone found me like laid out on the ground and thought I had had a heart attack. And so all of these events started happening, and now fast forward, different boyfriend, also was telling me that I had very strange sleep habits. Like he would just notice things that were like, seemed off. So I finally, and then this took 3 years of me having accidents and all these things. And then finally went, and then I was diagnosed with narcolepsy. And that's when I got on medication. And that's a whole nother story. And it's a tough one because with mental health, that's where my mental health journey really takes off because of the medication and the change in my life, which was both incredibly positive because for the first time in my life, I was awake. And for the first time in my life,
living.
I was living, but I was also feeling. And I think it brought on kind of extreme hyper reactions and, you know, maybe could have been a bit more managed, you know, like, again, this is 20 some years ago. So I hope it's being done a little bit differently now. And it was a really tough time. And so narcolepsy led to a lot of things, but now that I've got it so managed and all the other stuff kind of fell into place, without medication, I don't think that I would be able to be who I am while doing what I do. And I'm really fortunate to have that.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all that. What a journey. And it's so striking to me. I've talked to a lot of people with narcolepsy, like just how often people have these sort of like kind of like unbelievable experiences that are sort of like written off, explained away for years before they're officially diagnosed.
When I was passing out, I had so many physical, you know, checking my heart, I did all these stress tests. I did like running
tests.
Tons and tons of stuff, which was great, I guess, to rule out things. But like it took 2 years for them to finally say, one doctor that hadn't been around came in and he's like, why don't we do a sleep study? Feels like you could be falling asleep. And everyone's like, yeah, no, it's like definitely your heart, definitely this, you know.
And it's all too familiar.
Yeah. So then and then that sleep study is what within, I didn't even have to finish the naps the next day. They were like, yeah, you're narcoleptic. You can go now. You have narcolepsy.
They were like, you have an A+. You crushed this sleep study.
Yeah.
And so I don't think I've heard you mention like cataplexy type symptoms. No. So does that mean you have type 2 narcolepsy?
2, yeah.
Narcolepsy without cataplexy. Got it. can I ask, it sounds like especially after like this 3-year journey of like probably, not feeling your best. And
Yeah.
I imagine like, that the like feelings of shame that come when you're like, doing something that's kind of a faux pas, falling asleep in public, falling asleep while you're making out with your boyfriend, falling asleep in class. How did it feel once you had sort of like, a diagnosis, words to explain like, everything that you, or not everything, but like all of these symptoms that you'd been
Yeah.
experiencing? What was that like for you?
It was relieving, but then also at the same time kind of scary because now I had
Mhm.
something where I had to learn that that there really was something that I
Yeah.
couldn't explain away because it was there. And now it was, like most people, I was afraid of medication. I was
Mm-hmm.
afraid of relying on something. And I think it was, I don't know which doctor, but somebody said, well, you just have to look at it like diabetes. Like if you don't have, if you're born with type 1 and you don't have insulin, then you need insulin. And so look at it like that.
Yeah.
And it's too bad that certain people have to be, supplemented insulin, but you need to be supplemented a cognitive or a focus awakeness.
Yeah.
And that's where, and at the beginning it was Provigil at the
Mm-hmm.
very start, and I was on that for a very long time. And I think there's been such evolutions and different changes, and I've changed medications since. But because even after pregnancy, which we could talk about too, I felt like my narcolepsy changed a lot.
Yeah.
That was the first time since I was in my early 20s that I hadn't been on it. And so it had been more than a decade, no, way more. I mean, 14, 15 years since I had been without
Wow.
medication. So it was
Wow.
really interesting time. But obviously I got over it because, and since then though, I will say, and I'll be transparent, there have been many times where I'm like, let me just try. Let me go
Yeah.
for, a week. And then my husband will be like, we can't do this anymore.
Like you're a
this
mess.
this
Like,
isn't life. So, and maybe because we don't know, maybe it cuts you short 5 years, but he's like, it'd be worth it.
oh, 100%. It's like my boyfriend is so funny. Like we'll be watching TV and he'll like look at me. He'll look at my eyes. He's like, "You have sleepy eyes. You need a nap." And
Mm-hmm.
at this point, I'm like, "You're right." But like at the start of our relationship, I'd be like, "Stop!" Like, no.
Yeah. I'm
But
not even, well, it's not even the sleepy eye. It's like and what he does, and he's an expert communicator, and he has really taught me how to be a different type of partner.
mm-hmm.
But the one thing that I've gotten so much better at when I'm not on my medication, I go and revert right back, and I'm like, I'm foggy. My whole life is foggy. That's
Mm-hmm.
how I always explain narcolepsy, is like those two parts of when you have a film that doesn't fit the screen, and it's always like not everything's in there and you can't see it
Yeah.
all, and it doesn't look clear outside of there. And so he usually notices that, where he's talking to me about something and it's not because I'm distracted, it's because of my narcolepsy.
Yeah. That reminds me of something you said earlier, sort of how, once you were diagnosed and you started medication, and it sounds like the medication was effective enough to keep you sort of like more awake so that you're, experiencing, life in sort of more color, which I imagine sort of, and I think you sort of hinted at this, had both good and bad sort of mixed together. Tell me sort of what that was like, and what it was like to really sort of like feel the highs and also the lows as you really sort of like got your narcolepsy under control.
It's somebody else explain narcolepsy like you're never fully, like if the awake is the gas pedal and the brake is the sleep pedal,
Mm-hmm.
you're always halfway on each.
Ooh, I like the light switch, like it's always flickering.
Yeah, you're always between.
Mm-hmm.
You're always in between those. And so I had lived and created an emotional cognition or an emotional reaction, both because of environment, about who I
Mm-hmm.
grew up around, but also, and because of personality of what you're born with. But then I think that narcolepsy, especially in those teen years when it was developing and I didn't know what it was,
Yeah.
became a big part of my identity, which was I was really cool. I was cool. I didn't react. I could handle anything. And there's a real strength I felt in that. And because your identity is forming or trying to solidify at that time, I was holding on to it. So as soon as I took this medication and I was awake for the first time, I was not cool. I was anything but cool.
Yeah.
And I was feeling super high and super low.
Mm-hmm.
And the word feeling, like the emotional regulation was already a challenge for me, but
Yeah.
this took it to another level. And unfortunately, this is happening in one of the most difficult times in a person's life, in a privileged person. And I should say that
Yeah.
because but that post-college time when you're supposed to know everything, you're supposed to be an adult all of a sudden, but you've never been an adult before, there's a lot of responsibility suddenly put on people.
Yeah.
You're financially strapped, almost everybody. I had no money. I had college debt. I was just trying to be the adult I was supposed to be. And by the way,
Mm-hmm.
I was starting to feel for the first time ever. And so there was
Yeah.
all of this like up and down and highs and lows. And
Yeah.
those lows I had never ever been introduced to before, and I
Mm-hmm.
did not know what to do with them. And there wasn't any there wasn't any counseling around that part of the
Yeah.
medication.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it sounds like this was, I think you mentioned Provigil. This was like the pretty early days of even that medication. And I think also maybe 20 years ago, there was less sort of acknowledgement of the sort of like, you know, mental health impact of like a new diagnosis or like having these sort of life challenges like pop up in the
Yeah.
midst of your like identity formation period of life.
Yeah. So I think it actually slowed down that identity formation for a long time
Yeah.
for me because it sent me into, and I can look at some of the environmental things and the traumas, and I've worked so hard in therapy to go through, but this just, much like climate change, where climate change is never the cause. Humans have not
Mm-hmm.
we have not caused rain to fill streets of Brooklyn,
Right.
right? That would have always happened naturally, but they amplify
Right.
it, and our emissions amplify it. And that's what Provigil did, was these
Mm-hmm.
traumas and the things that were happening in that time of life, this amplified it.
That's a great metaphor.
Yeah.
How did you, like, you know, looking back, what do you think got you through that period, and how did you cope with that sort of adjustment period?
I mean, I'm so lucky to be sitting here, honestly. Like I nearly took my life. I had suicide attempts, and I was not in a place, and nor did I was never honest with myself first, and then I wasn't honest with other people,
Yeah.
so then that becomes this horrible circle and kind of
Totally.
spiral. And so how I got through that, I think a big part of it is grace from whether it's God or a universe or
Mm-hmm.
being surrounded eventually by people who care was a huge help.
Yeah.
And being fortunate to have that, because so few people do. And then eventually having the financial privilege, the privilege of having a family that believed in getting me help, and the access to care.
Mm-hmm.
All of those things are probably the team combo that gets me to a much healthier place eventually.
Yeah.
And to be able to, what's fascinating too is, in those terrible mental health years that came soon after, I felt like nobody knew anything about Provigil because it was so new. And so when,
Mm-hmm.
you go to a doctor, and this is, say I'm going to a new psychiatrist because it's required by the hospital after a suicide attempt, which
Mm-hmm.
is good. But also something that's come quite a while,
Yeah.
quite a ways in many places. I feel like they ask you, and then they'd be like, "What's that?" And then I'd be like, "It's a drug for narcolepsy." And they're like, and you see even a doctor thinking about what narcolepsy is, because it's so not, especially 20 years ago, not studied as much, and certainly not something that they spend a lot of time on because it wasn't really as prominent.
Totally.
And so, not to their fault, but I don't even know that some of the things that they were going to try me on then was a great combo
Yeah.
with it. Nor did, maybe there weren't immediate something,
Or
just wasn't the right thing.
certainly not evidence-based, right? It would have just been
Because
like sort of like
Provigil
throwing
was,
stuff at a wall and seeing
yeah,
shit.
because it was too new. And
Yeah.
so how lucky now that, and I've come to a place where I know I figured out all the rest of that stuff, and then Provigil
Mhm.
just did what it was supposed to do,
You mentioned earlier that, it sounds like you were on medication for a while, and then there was sort of this period of life when you started to have kids and sort of navigating pregnancy. Tell me a little bit about what that was like, and, how you approached that with narcolepsy and with or without medications, and I'm very
Well,
curious.
I know, because again, I asked my doctor, like, so if I want to get, my husband and I are considering having
Mhm.
kids, and I want to get pregnant. And so what should I do about Provigil? And my OB was like, I don't know what that is. Like, I don't know that. He looked it up. There's like not a lot of study when it comes to
Yeah,
pregnancy, and even
it's
some of the
it's
other ones.
a huge issue. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and both, I had a female doctor first baby, and this, both of them were like, well, I feel like go off of it just if you can, just to make sure.
Yeah.
It's like, so I kind of, especially with the first pregnancy, was so nervous and I didn't want anything to go wrong. So
Hmm.
I decided to go off of it. And that first month was so hard. I mean,
Yeah.
it was hard for me. It was hard for my job. It was hard for my husband.
Yeah.
And then I was so lucky. I did get pregnant really fast. I
Hmm.
mean, it was quick. So this is where I think the study could really be helpful, because I have to say, from the beginning of the pregnancy on, I had a really great pregnancy,
Hmm.
and I don't I think it helped my narcolepsy. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if the hormones do something that we don't know, but it was not even nearly as bad as that first month as
Yeah.
I went through. And as much as people, it's so funny because people are always like, in pregnancy, they're like, oh man, being tired is like the number one thing. And I thought, either I'm conditioned because of my job, because I wake up in the middle of the night or
Hmm.
whatever. I feel the best I ever have. It's like,
Oh my goodness.
yeah. And then the even better part is, once I did not, once I had the baby and then it was breastfeeding time, that's when I started to feel the difference again. And then
Okay.
nobody knows, like, are you transferring it to your baby?
Mm-hmm.
So like, I breastfed for 3 months after my first child. And then I was doing the show Dancing with the Stars, and I was traveling across the country doing 2 jobs at once and being a new mom. And so
Easy peasy.
by the time, and kind of the intense workouts for dancing shortened my breastfeeding time, because I was just like doing 4 hours of cardio a day. So like I had nothing, and I was shedding like everything in my body so fast. And
Wow.
so once the last drops came out, I was like, give me my Provigil. I don't even know if I was taking,
Please.
yeah, I was taking Provigil at that time. And then it was like, it settled right back into normal. And so I don't know if it was just me telling myself and it was half placebo or what it was, but it worked. And then when I went to do what changed though, and this is where I can't really distinguish because I also know that sometime around there, Provigil went generic.
Hmm.
And then I noticed a remarkable difference in my side effects after the baby.
Mm.
And so I don't know if that was because I hadn't done it for a year,
Yeah.
or the hormone. I couldn't tell you, and I don't know if any studies could tell you, but my personal experience was it was giving me horrific headaches. And I
Mm.
basically, after a month or two back on it, it was like, oh God, I'm so glad to be back on it, for the feeling that I have of feeling like myself.
Yeah.
But then I started having really adverse side effects. And so that's when I went back to
Oh.
a doctor and said, is there anything else out there these days that I
Yeah.
could supplement with? And then I found what I'm currently on, and that was Sunosi. So,
Well, that's a great reminder that, like, even when you think you have it figured out, like, life with narcolepsy, really life in general, it's like always a work in progress. Like, you're always kind of just iterating, and like, sometimes what has worked for the last 15 years doesn't always
doesn't
work.
work anymore.
It's hard, but you get through it.
Yeah.
How has it been being a parent with narcolepsy? I know you have 2 boys. How old are they now?
5 and 7. Yeah.
Aw. What is that like in general? Like, and how do you feel like living with narcolepsy has impacted the way that you parent?
I think it's strange because I have my medication. I think I am who I would be, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
the thing that's probably more impactful is my work and the structure. I probably would do that even if I didn't have narcolepsy, but I know how important sleep is for a narcoleptic. And so I'm the bad guy. I'm like, it is 7:30. We need to be upstairs brushing our teeth, doing this. And they're like, Mom, Dad would let us watch for like 10 more minutes, or like, or they're playing another game of running around and having a blast, and I'm like, like I'm playing the double dutch of like, when do I jump in and be bad mom again? And
Totally.
so I can't say that that's narcolepsy specifically or the combination with my job, but I think it's both.
Yeah.
And that is something that I try really hard to navigate, because I have to prioritize that for my own health. But they're getting older.
Mm-hmm.
And like 7:15, 7:30 is really early. You know, like some families don't eat dinner till then. And I'm all,
Right.
it's 5 o'clock if we don't have dinner right now. And so, so the flexibility going forward, it was very easy when they were young because I would just tell them what we were doing. Now they have opinions, and now they have
they're like so many adults.
Now they have soccer practice until whatever, and they're like, I don't care what you have, I've got stuff too. And you have to realize that this isn't just about you anymore. And so that, I mean, it's never just been about me being a parent. You realize that pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But schedule wise, I used to be able to tell them what to do, and now they do have, and rightfully so, they got stuff to do. And Adrian's like, I have homework. I'm like, you have homework already?
What is happening?
Like, I have to go to sleep. I don't have time for your homework.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I don't know that, but you know, falling asleep and such, because I am on my medication, I don't really have an issue with that. And it helps me to stay focused and get the things done that I need to be as a mom.
How do you balance it all? Like narcolepsy, parenting, work,
I don't.
storm chasing,
authoring
books. Like
I'm always traveling, and that's the hardest part of the said balance, because I really am not balancing. And my husband is incredible. He is such a great support, and we don't have family nearby, so we pay for help, and we are so lucky to be able to do that and privileged to be able to have that help when we need it. But he does take a huge part of the load, like huge. I was gone for 2 nights and 3 days this week, so that's 3 times where after the school bus, we don't have care after school. And my husband has to make sure he is there, gets everybody to practice, does this thing, and he's doing it by himself. It's masterful. Like, he's the parent I always wanted to be. so
lucky that you found each other.
Yes.
How has COVID impacted like work and life and everything? And I'm curious if some of the flexibility of the virtual nature of work made some of these things easier or harder.
Mostly we had COVID early. We were like patient zeros. And so we did not, I traveled right away. Like, I think it was, my first trip was May. And so, and I didn't stop. That 2020 year was, there were like 6 hurricanes around New Orleans. We've had just such a wild few years in climate and weather that I've had so many stories to tell. And so I've not stopped. And I've been back in the studio, or at least with a crew outdoors since that fall. So it really hasn't, the thing that's different is this type of thing, like where we all got more used to being able to do more on social and more on Zoom. Like, today I took a background Zoom for one of the fire stories we have coming up, that kind of thing, being able to do that at home. But see, in that case, I guess I would have just done it on the phone anyway. So for me, I don't think it changed that much. Because news didn't stop.
Yeah, totally. In fact, news probably got even more vital.
It did. Yeah.
How do you, when you are on the road and like, moving through time zones and literal storms, like how do you find time to rest and like, do the things that at the end of the day are like going to be best for both your overall health and your narcolepsy?
That's where my travel and chasing storms does not lend itself, because you don't have activity, you don't move your body, you're in a car or an airplane or whatever it is the entire time. So for 3 days this past week, I did nothing except just run and work 20 hours of the day, truly 20 hours. Like, you are just constantly on the go, and then sleep too short, don't move your body. And here's where it's been really hard for me, because Sunosi and most of these controlled substances cannot be found in, you can't cross state lines. You can't like go to another pharmacy in another state and say, give me my Sunosi. That's not going to happen. So I have found, especially lately, the last year, we don't have planned trips.
Mm-hmm.
We know when a hurricane's forming, but that usually gives us somewhere between 3 to 7 at the most days to kind
Yeah.
of know. So right now, as I see my Sunosi getting low, and then you can't order any extra, you have to wait until whatever this perfect day is. And I still cannot figure this out for the life of me, because the pharmacies, I swear, I know they've dealt with me a lot, and I've switched because I'm like, I'm not going here anymore. Because they always have to order it. And I'm like, no, every month I'm coming here for this thing.
Right.
And then so I will often get caught where I have to start splitting pills. And it's not even close to as effective. And there's no way to get extra to have that bumper for the, times when this happens. And then I go on the road and I didn't know. And my work will say, oh my gosh, we need you to fill in for whatever. It's not even related to weather or anything, but I still have to go fly and do it. And so that has been hard. And I will immediately get on the phone with one of the pharmacies and be like, can you please get this? Is there any way? And they're like, yeah. And then I'm waiting. It's 3 days later and they still haven't filled it. And I'm like, oh my God.
I've tried just so many pharmacists in the 5 years I've had narcolepsy. Like, thank you, pharmacists, for listening to us. But also, like, can this system work better, please?
But also, they can't do anything about it.
I know.
From my understanding. And then they told me I've gone to some of them. I've had full conversations about why financially they can't take the hit if I don't show up. So it's not like they can pre-fill it. Okay, but like, am I really the only person? Apparently, I am.
There's literally no way. There's no way.
I don't know, but I can't get it. And then I'm like, this is what I worry, that it would open up people to wanting to like find something from someone else, or like not doing it the right way. Because I've almost gotten to that point where I'm like, does anybody have anything?
Right, and
that's not a good place to be.
It's so unfair, because it's sort of like what you were saying earlier. It's like, well, if you had type 1 diabetes and ran out of insulin, like, no one would look at you like, what's wrong with you? Why are you so intent on getting more insulin?
Yeah.
But yeah, there's just something a little different, I think, about the way at least people perceive narcolepsy.
Yeah, and I understand, because it can be abused, right? Like it can be used and abused by people, but I wish there was a way for them to delineate and say, no, I see she's been on this for 22 years. Like, cool.
Give her a year's supply.
She seems all right. Yeah.
That sort of brings me to a question I always like to ask people with narcolepsy when I talk to them. Is there something that you wish people knew about narcolepsy that you feel like maybe isn't as widely understood, or you just sort of like, one thing you like, if you could put this in everyone's head?
Yeah, I used to get really offended that, like when they would make fun of it or think it's a funny thing, when really it impacts my life so much every day. And like, I've gotten over that. I don't know if it's just time or age, but I've just kind of just leaned into the joke, because part of it is funny, like but it used to really upset me because it had been so embarrassing. So I've gone through this roller coaster of emotions. So I wouldn't say it's that anymore. I wish just like what we're doing now, if there's someone who, I think a lot of people have it. Well, we know this. A lot of people have it and it is undiagnosed. So I wish that people would feel empowered to be able and have access to care. That's the other thing is, do you know how hard it is, even here in New York City, in the tri-state, to find there's the best care ever here for everything except this, apparently. Yeah. And I've switched, I've jumped around, I've tried to find, and a lot of times you end up in the neurology, and then the neurologists are like, I kind of know sleep. That's cool, right? And that shouldn't be. So I can't imagine if I'm struggling with that. I wish we had more trained people to be able to not just diagnose, but to then see people through, and then more research for these other parts of life, and I can't imagine what happens when I get to menopause, because my hormones are going to change again, and Sunosi might not work anymore. Like, I don't know. So I hope that the whole industry can change and get more momentum. And I know that's what you all are doing every day, and that's what these groups are doing, and I applaud you, because that work needs to be done.
Totally. In a perfect world, like I want every, like, elementary school teacher and school nurse and like college counselor, and like, you know, think about like all of the people you probably interacted with when you were demonstrating such clear symptoms and signs of narcolepsy that like could have, had they just known what narcolepsy was, been that person to be like, hey, like what you're experiencing isn't normal, and like we should like look into this, and like I want to support you through that.
Yeah, no, I just know I'm very lucky to be here for all the reasons I said, but also even the car accidents I got in, like, oh, and something I didn't mention is, much like everything else that people don't go get checked out, once I figured out I was falling asleep to get into car accidents, I started closet smoking cigarettes. So that was like my coping, because it would at least have something that kept me awake, that kept me busy, that kept the window open. You know, I was so used to kind of like singing loud and screaming and like trying to keep myself awake. But then I started, and I mean, I was like the health nut of nuts. Like I would be mortified back then if anybody found out that I was smoking, and the effort that I put in to cover up my closet smoking, because most people do it the other way. They're like a social smoker, but they would never do it by themselves. I was smoking only when driving, but smoking is smoking. And there were years where I got, you know, I was never a true smoker, I wouldn't call it, but that wasn't healthy. That wasn't good. And it kind of put me on a bad spiral. And still to this day, like the power of nicotine and habit, there are still moments where I'm like, I would love to have a cigarette. What the heck? That's not even me.
No, it's so fascinating. And I just want to say, I so appreciate how candid you are about, you know, everything you've sort of shared with us, and just generally being open about your experience with narcolepsy, but also your mental health challenges. And I think I try to do this in my life, and being in medicine, like, you know, letting people know like what narcolepsy can look like, and also just like reminding people that, you know, you can, it's empowering to like share the things that, like, you know, all parts of what make you who you are, both the wonderful things you've accomplished and the challenging things you've overcome to like get where you are. So I really appreciate the way that you share so openly about the good and the bad and everything in between.
Thanks. You too.
Well, I don't want to keep you from the rest of the day, and I see that we are just past, well, a little more than just past the 30-minute mark. Any final last words you'd like to share to our audience here before we sign off?
Yeah, I mean, I see people saying like what they wish would be changed, and I think that's just the beginning of it. So I appreciate everybody that's watching, because I know that this is something, and we all have our own story, but it does kind of gel you together, and it makes a community. And so keeping that. And I often say, you know, I have this with mental health, but also with this is, I wish we could treat things like people do post natural disaster. I've had this unique job where I show up, and I am either the first person, I'm definitely there before, during, and after, but I'm often the first person people talk to when they have lost a lot, or when they have just come to, you know, knowing they have narcolepsy. It'd be like equivalent to that. And I wish we could treat it like that, because I've watched the human reaction to these natural things. They go through kind of the shock, they go through these layers of grief, but they do it really fast, and they process it really quickly. And then at the end they come to the cliche, like the best of humans comes out of people. And it's because they're all having a shared forum. It's because they all, you know, and they can't hide that a tornado came through, so they have to show everyone. And then their neighbor's like, oh my gosh, the tornado hit me too, what are you doing for insurance? And they start asking questions. That's what we have to do with all of these other lesser forefront things. Make it obvious, make it known, and then come together and figure out how we can help each other. And so being able to, and that's why I want to applaud everybody here, because they took the time to listen in, and hopefully they'll share their story with us.
It's like if we just treated our own struggles like little natural disasters, and I know that's the name of your book, and all of us, and used it to connect rather than to like isolate. I think, you know, so much positive change
and
can happen.
then sustain that,
Totally.
because that's something that natural disasters haven't gotten going yet. Like the response and the love and all the support goes right away, but go to one of these places a year later and nobody's there. And then they kind of go through these other dips. So it needs to be like that with narcolepsy too.
Totally. I agree. Everybody here, help us get there.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ginger. It was wonderful to talk with you, and I look forward to continuing to see what you do.
You too. Thank you.
Great to meet you. Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.